Why was the KGB the tallest building in the Soviet Union? Because you could see Siberia from its basement. Hi, welcome to Russian History of Russia. 3 months without a haircut and going. My name is Asya and I'm a Siberian, so this bonus episode on one of the most mysterious, misunderstood and gigantic regions on our planet was kind of inevitable. It also happened to be so long that I had to make it into a two-parter, and this is part 1. So the reactions that I get when I tell people that that's where I'm originally from can be just priceless. And so is the black and white rainbow of labels that is often attached to it. It's covered in snow like all year round and is full of gulags and bears strolling the streets and communists and vodka, and getting hit by a meteorite is a legit threat. I don't think I would be able to cover all of that, but I am going to talk about the history of exploration of Siberia, as well as what it is like to be born and raised there. And about some of those popular myths and misconceptions about it. I mean, I have seen a bear in America. I have never seen one in Siberia.
It's big, it's cold, it's full of gas and gold. It's 1200 years old, but still never does as told. We're Christians, but not really Europeans, but from Asia. We send the dogs to space and kill the Tsars on occasion. We drink sodas made from bread, eat our enemies in kasha, and that's why it's so fun to study history of Russia.
So, Siberia, or Sibir, is a massive geographical region that spans from the Ural Mountains to the Pacific and from the Arctic to Mongolia. The far east strip of the Pacific coast is technically not a part of it, but for the sake of not overcomplicating, I'm not going to hover over that. Siberia makes up 77% of modern Russian territory, while 77% of the population lives in the European Russia, which without Siberia would only have been the 7th country in the world by landmass, about half the size of Australia or Brazil. History of Siberia and its people is actually incredibly similar to that of the Americas, especially the northern one. Russians too tend to slip and say it was discovered, while it's pretty presumptuous to say something was discovered when people already, lived there. And in case of Native Americans, Siberia in fact is where they migrated from or through in order to populate the American continent. Russian discover and conquer gig was also happening around the same time and on the same timeline as the Americas in 16th, 18th centuries. And this first kind of Russian conquistador by the name of Yermak looks like he could easily be conquering Incas, not the Siberians. Just like American Indians, indigenous Siberian population did not leave us much written historical sources to work with, and they too did not view each other as a brotherly Siberian, but rather as completely separate tribes and people. And the similarities don't stop here either. These exploration, conquest, and settling were two semi-voluntary government-sponsored endeavors taken on by the brave or the desperate or both. It was mostly driven by the fur trade and the search for new fertile lands to farm. The latter being much more successful in the case of American explorers, as you might imagine, due to climate and landscape, which I'll get to a bit later. The indigenous Siberian population was too exposed to European diseases that they had no immunity to, like smallpox, and to sustained catastrophic losses. And today, most of Siberian administrative territories are up to 80% comprised of ethnic Russians of Slavic descent. The conquest of Siberia was violent and dehumanizing and accompanied by forced conversion into Christianity and destruction of identity and culture. Tell me if that sounds any familiar. Just like American West, Siberia went through a huge gold rush period in the 19th century that created massive migration and population growth. And as a result, it had to deal with very similar issues like trying to figure out what life looks like for its complex migrant population. All of that is to say that if you are an American or very familiar with the history of the US, there are many more similarities between the European-American expansion west and the Russian-Siberian expansion east than you might think. That is, at least until the 20th century. Today, Siberia is a massive fountain of natural resources like minerals and oil and gas, but the 17th, 19th century settlers would have much rather found something that looks more like Iowa than this. However, this is Siberian Taiga, and it produces a resource I'd argue much more valuable than any I listed above, the third of all the Earth's oxygen produced above the ground. Like, heating is important, but breathing a bit more so. Taiga also happens to be an enormous and really dense forest, which, as you might probably know, is not the easiest thing to explore or build roads through or farm, which is why it is still quite unpopulated to this day. Most of the modern-day Siberian dwellers live in the urban centers grouped along the southern parts of Siberia, and that has less to do with how dense the forest is or how much it snows or not, and more with permafrost. In permafrost, the soil remains frozen throughout the year when summer temperatures and duration just can't penetrate deep enough, which creates very unfriendly farming conditions, leaving a very shallow layer of farmable land. And together with the short northern summers, which are not very long even in the southern regions of Siberia, limit the harvest time and the types of crops that can survive. And there is no better way to illustrate that than Nikita Khrushchev's great corn race with America. In the 50s and 60s, Khrushchev spearheaded the Virgin Lands campaign in the Soviet Union, a massive expansion of agricultural production through transformation of unused lands. Basically, if we have so much land, why is there nothing to eat kind of incentive, which is fair, but also This is why. None of the stuff, as I mentioned before, is Iowa. The Soviet leader was particularly obsessed with A, being better than the US at anything and everything, and B, corn, which was and still is the main agricultural driver of the US economy. Some of the attempts were successful, especially in the European Russia, where the first couple of years were nice and warm. But as for Siberia, well, let's just say there's a reason it's not famous for never-ending golden fields of corn. A while ago, I read a memoir of someone I think worked those virgin lands, and this image of college kids making fires and sleeping on the ground, trying to warm with their bodies, those dying corn sprouts frozen by the cold spring, is just stuck in my head forever. Khrushchev also happens to be the one to thank for planting millions of cottonwood trees in every major Russian city, and why my childhood looked like this. God, burning that fluff as a kid was like the most satisfying thing in the whole world. Thanks, Nikita Sergeyevich, but let's agree that botany was not your strong suit. However, while permafrost and short summers have definitely contributed to the reason no major civilization had ever arisen in that region, Siberian climate, especially in the southern parts, is not as extreme as it has been popularized in the culture. The place I grew up in, the city of about 700,000 called Irkutsk, located near Lake Baikal, has cold but very dry and sunny winters with average temperatures of about -15 Celsius or 0 Fahrenheit in December throughout February, which is better than North Dakota, and nice moderate summers in 60s and 70s or 20s in Celsius. Dry, white winters are actually pretty great and sparkly. You just have to dress accordingly, and you can stay warm for hours if you're staying active. So for me, it was a pretty great place to grow up in, with all the winter sports and fun, and of course spending summers on Lake Baikal, a truly magical place. The deepest freshwater lake in the world, with unique ecosystem, white sand beaches, delicious fish, and also these guys, endemic freshwater seals called nerpa. Just look at it. So, for me it's amusing because that is the childhood I think of when I say that I'm from Siberia, while the person I'm saying that to often thinks, judging from their face, that I was born in a labor camp and raised by bears. To be fair, a lot of record-breaking, most northern, most coldest cities in the world are also located in Siberia. That's just not where the majority of the population lives. There is about a dozen major urban centers with over 500,000 million people, and 4 cities with over 1 million, all located south of the permafrost border, mostly along the Trans-Siberian Railway, a mind-blowingly 9,300 kilometers or almost 6,000 miles long railroad built in the end of the 19th century that directly connected Moscow to the Pacific Ocean. Where did all these people come from, and how did Siberia become part of Russia in the first place? Well, that, like so many other things, starts with the Mongols, and that is where I'm going to take off for part 2 of this episode because I really need a glass of wine or 3. See you soon. Bye.